Okay, today I'm going to speak about the forgotten Holocaust in the context of the commemoration of genocide of Roma and Sinti. But before I start, I would like to explain what is the term Roma and Sinti mean. Maybe you know what is the difference between both of the terms, Roma and Sinti.
Does anyone know what the difference is? No, good.
People in Europe don't know as well, so I'm not surprised. Actually, Roma people are the biggest ethnic minority in Europe. It's about 15 million people, but Roma people are divided into different groups. The researchers say that in Europe live about a few hundreds Roma group. So we have Roma, Sinti, Manus, Calais, Calderasha, Lovara, and many others. But the Roma and Sinti are the more known among majority societies in Europe. So Roma people live in every European countries. And Sinti live only in Germany and German-speaking countries. So this is the difference. Very known term among Europeans are also gypsies. I don't know how it's here in the United States. Probably it's very similar situation. But I would like to say that that gypsy, it's how can I say? It's something like a fake name. It's not from Roma language. It's a name which was given by the Europeans when Roma people came to Europe between 10th and 15th century, actually 14th century, sorry for my mistake. And today this gypsy term is not used because of pejorative meanings. In Poland, for example, gypsy means the same, liar and gypsy is the same. So it's a very pejorative meaning. So in public space, it's not used now. Okay, when we are talking about the persecution of Roma and Sinti, we must remember that it wasn't new tendency. The history of discrimination of Roma and Sinti in Europe had a very long history and began in the 16th century, so very early. However, as Professor Gabriel Talewicz stressed, the persecution during the war had a different character because it resulted was extermination of Roma and Sinti. About 70% of Roma and Sinti population were murdered during the war. Okay, but now I would like to focus on the persecution of Roma and Sinti during the World War II. And a very important moment was election in Germany. It was 1933, sorry. And after this election, Nazi had a power, and the solution of the gypsy question, because they call this like that, was one of the goals of the National Socialist Party. And gypsy problem was defined in categories of the fight against the crime. But the racial element was added very soon. In 1935, it's a very important date because Roma and Sinti were included in the Nuremberg laws. And as we can read in this document, basically only Jews and Gypsies are of alien blood in Europe, as a result of which they might not in principle obtain the rights of citizens of the Reich. So actually they had the same or very similar situation as Jewish people. Roma people lost their citizenship. They couldn't have married with the Germans. They didn't have any right to vote. The night of the 2nd of August was the most tragic moment in the history of Roma and Sinti. It was the date when Germans started the liquidate of the Roma camp, which was situated at the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. The camp called Zigeunerlager or Familien-Zigeunerlager, because in this camp Roma from all occupied Europe were deported, and they were with all family together. They were not divided. So during the one night, 2nd of August, all Roma people who were there were murdered in gas chamber. It was about 3,000 Roma and Sinti. Before the liquidation, Germans deported the Roma and Sinti to Ravensbrück, and after liquidation, I mean not everybody, they deported strong and young men, because the Germans wanted to be ready to liquidate the camp very quickly. So after liquidation of Zigeunerlager, the strong and young men, as I said, they came back to Zigeunerlager, and they were murdered with the Jewish people in gas chambers. Despite in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau became the symbol of the extermination of Roma and Sinti, we must remember that it wasn't only one place where they were murdered. Roma and Sinti were murdered in the death camps in all occupied Europe. But since 1940, Roma and Sinti were deported to occupied Poland. It was a new tendency, as I said, since 1940. And very popular practice in Poland was to imprison Roma people in Jewish ghettos, which they were taken with Jewish people to the concentration or death camps. The situation Roma and Sinti outside the Third Reich depended on the country, on the policy actually, in the countries where they lived. The very also popular practice was also mass execution outside the camps. And it was very known in Ukraine, Belarus, former Yugoslavia, and Poland. Because of mass execution, actually we don't know how many Roma and Sinti were killed during the World War II. In Poland, we found about 180 mass graves. But actually we really don't know what's going on or what is the situation in Belarus, in former Yugoslavia's country, and in Ukraine. So the research is still on the process. But the most popular numbers, which is most accepted, it's 500,000 victims. It's about 70, sometimes researchers said 80% of the population of Roma and Sinti. You can see the pictures. It's the plan of KL Auschwitz II, and part B2E. This is the place where Zigeunerlager was situated. The camp was consisted of 32 wooden barracks, and the conditions were even worse than main camp because of the wooden, as I said, wooden barrack. This is the pictures from the Zigeunerlager as well. This is barracks, but just only one line. It was a Zigeunerlager. And this is pictures from inside the camps. About 500 people in one Barak lived there. And you can see the map with the ghettos, concentration and extermination camp in occupied Europe. So you can see how many places it was. It's not only Auschwitz-Birkenau, it's not only Zigeunerlager, it's also camps and as I said before, in Poland, Jewish ghettos. Sometimes when people visit different camps, actually museum in Poland, the guide said, here in Bełżec or for example in Majdanek, no Roma during the war. It's not true. They were there, but they were added to the Jewish transport. So that's why they don't have any documents which prove that Roma were there as a Roma transport from other place. But they were actually in every camps in occupied Poland, and not only, of course, Poland. In post-war period, memory about the persecution, about the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti actually didn't exist. Nobody discussed about scale and methods of the racial motivated genocide of Roma and Sinti. And that's why I think that it's really worth to recall the words of the professor Gerhard Baumgartner, who is a historian and researcher, who said during the conference in Stockholm, which took place 2 years ago, and he said in his speech that it's really difficult to talk about restoring the memory of the extermination of the Roma and Sinti because it has never been forgotten. Why? Because the memory about Roma and Sinti Holocaust never existed. And of course we can ask the question, what is the reason of it? And actually there is a few answers. Roma and Sinti were absent from the Nuremberg trials. This is the first. Second, while a new established German Federal Republic quickly acknowledged Jewish victim, it kept silence for decades about the genocide of the Roma and Sinti and didn't grant any compensation rights to people who had survived nightmare of the war. German Federal Republic recognized the genocide of Roma and Sinti in 1982. So you can see it was really, really late. The lack of intellectual base among Roma and Sinti communities. After the war, of course. You know that Jewish people had a very, very strong intellectual base and people who can fight for memory. Among the Roma and Sinti, unfortunately, no people who could do this. And of course, the very complicated situation was in Eastern Bloc countries where communists had the power. So it was a really big challenge to preserve Roma identity and Roma culture in new social and economic system while facing assimilation policy towards minority and of course towards Roma as well. And lack of scientific research. This is the problem as well. Now the situation it's of course different, but it took some time before the results of this research reached wider public. The first publication about Roma and Sinti genocide was published in 1949 by Dora Yates in journal American Jewish Association. But it was a one article. It wasn't a book. It wasn't monography. It was a one article, 1949. The first book about the Roma and Sinti Holocaust was published in Poland. Jerzy Ficowski was the author, and the book was published in 1964. The book is entitled Gypsy in Polish Road, and one chapter is dedicated of Roma and Sinti Holocaust. Jerzy Ficowski was the member Roma population in Poland. Actually, he wasn't Roma. He wasn't Roma, but he was close friends. And he discovered very famous Roma poet who names Papusza. Maybe you've heard about her. She's very popular in Poland, and the movie, popular movie as well, based on her life, was a very popular last year in Poland and in other European countries. So he met people, and he heard the story about the mass execution, because, as I said, it was a very known practice in Poland as well. So he heard about the mass execution, about the camps, about the history during the war, and she wrote everything. She and sorry, not she, he, and the book, as I said, was published in 1964. And a very, very important book was published in Great Britain in 1972. The author were Gratan Paxson and Donald Kenrick. The Destinies of European Gypsies. This is the title of the book. But you can see how late it was. Today, the memory about the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti is a very important issue for Roma and Sinti, especially for the leaders and especially for educated people. The memory of the Nazi crimes is a unifying element for Roma and Sinti who live among many countries, diverse in terms of dialect and culture. We have to remember that Roma and Sinti don't have own countries, so everywhere they are minorities. So that's why this is important, extremely important factor contributing to the create of the identity. I would like to come back to the question which I asked before at the beginning of my presentation. What is the present state of the commemoration of the Roma and Sinti Holocaust in Poland? I would like to focus in a project which are creating by the Roma Association in a cooperation with the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. In 1991, the first conference devoted to the Sinti and Roma at the Cal Auschwitz-Birkenau was organized. As you see, it's very late, because we have to remember that in Poland we had a communist period until 1989. So 1989. So 1991, it was the first initiative in Poland, which was dedicated or devoted to the Sinti and Roma memory. 2 years later, in 1993, the 50th anniversary of the deportation of Roma and Sinti to Cal Auschwitz-Birkenau was organized. And the initiator of both event was a Polish historian who works at the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau, Wacław Długoborski. He is a historian, but he is also survived. So he really good remember what's going on at the camps with the Roma and Sinti. So he was and he still is very, very active in this field. In 1994, very important date for all Roma and Sinti, because it was a date where for the first time was organized 50th anniversary of the liquidation of the Zigeunerlager at the Cal Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was the first time when this anniversary was organized, and it was a 50th anniversary. let me share with you my very personal memory, because I really good remember this date, and I was 14 years old girl, and I remember that just only few people were with us. 4 people from Roma community, 3 people from Jewish community, and 2 people from State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was our first anniversary. And now this anniversary has a very international character and attract media attention. And it's very important, especially when we recall Gerhard Baumgartner word, that the memory actually never existed in the public space. Now the situation in Poland, and not only in Poland, this is important, it's really different. 2001, also important day, because it was opening an exhibition devoted to Roma and Sinti Holocaust at the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. Very late again. They, I don't know if somebody been at the museum Auschwitz-Birkenau?
How many of you have been to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the museum? Raise your hands. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you remember that there is more than a few national buildings. I mean, buildings with the national exhibitions about the genocide, about actually about not about genocide, about the situation nations during the War II. Roma building was open in 2001. Before this date, and unfortunately, no place for Roma and Sinti. And it's very important that this exhibition was created by Roma organization from Germany, from Poland, of course in cooperation with the State Museum, but the initiator of this was a Roma and Sinti organization. And actually many European institutions and the Roma families were engaged to work with this. 2 years ago, Roma and Sinti Holocaust Day was officially recognized by Polish Parliament. In turn, in April 2015, European Parliament resolution recognizing Roma Memorial Day, actually 2nd of August as a Roma Memorial Day, was adopted. So it's also very new. You can see the monument, which is dedicated of Roma and Sinti victims. This monument is situated at the Karl Auschwitz, actually at the former Zigeunerlager at the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau area. What is important, this monument was created thanks Roma and Sinti organizations, so they were initiators as well. It was 1972, and after 1994, the monument was renovated, and also it was also initiative Roma organization, not State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. Oh, you can see the pictures from the anniversary from last year, if I could remember. A lot of people, few hundred, even more. Last year we had 1,500 people. And what is very important for us, also Roma and Sinti from different European countries are with us. It's important because we must remember that Roma and Sinti don't have any opportunities to learn about their own history at school. They are a minority everywhere. And the knowledge about the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti, in Poland, for example, and in many European countries, it's only a few sentences.
Yeah.
So actually they don't have any opportunities to learn more about their own history. So that's why very important part of anniversaries are educational activities, which are dedicated for Roma and non-Roma communities. Lack of knowledge about the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti, it's not only among Roma people, Roma and Sinti, it's also among majorities. People don't know actually anything about Roma and Sinti genocide, about Roma and Sinti generally. In Poland, it's a really small part at school, which is dedicated for Roma. And of course, this is a history during the World War II. But people don't know anything, even if they live together, if they have lived together since 15th century in Poland. And this is one of the example. It's a Polish-German workshops, Roma, the past and the present. It's a workshop for Germans and Polish students, for Roma and non-Roma students. And it's during the workshop, student can they have opportunity to find out more about Roma and Sinti genocide. This is of course very important part of this workshop. But we are talking also about the present situation of Roma and Sinti in Europe, in Poland, in Germany. And maybe you know that the situation is very, very complicated, and the image of the Roma people are very negative. So we are trying to explain people about explain the situation of the different countries. We are talking about the history, about the stereotypes, about the hate speech. So this is very important, and all participants this workshop are part of official anniversary. I mean, they participate in official anniversary. You can see some. This is the picture from the exhibition dedicated of Roma and Sinti Holocaust, which is situated in at the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's block number 13. So if you will be there someday, you can visit this building, block number 13. Yeah, I would like to mention about the book, about a very important book, which is titled Mano, the Boy from Nowhere. It's a book which was published in 2008 in Germany, and it was bestseller. I found out about this book during the German-Polish workshop, which I mentioned before, and I realized that I know the person from this book. It's Mano Hollenreiner. He's a Sinto who has survived and who is still alive. And we decided to publish this book in Poland because it's a book which is based on true life story, yeah, of Mano Hollenreiner. And actually, it's a first book which is published in Poland, which is based on true life story and which concern Roma and Sinti genocide. So, and this is book which is addressed also for young people. It's not only it's not scientific book. You know what I mean? It's not academic book. It's a book for younger generation. So it's very important. Now we are working to translate this book in Romani. Romani, it's a Roma language. but the memory about the Roma and Sinti Holocaust, it's not only Poland, of course, and thanks God, because a lot of initiative take place in other country, and very, very important even took place in 2012 in Germany. It was the date where when the monument dedicated of Roma and Sinti Holocaust victims was open in Berlin, and it was it was a really long process, which was started 20 years ago, and 2012 is the date when actually we finish everything. The monument it's next to Jewish monument. It's actually it's the heart of Berlin, so it's also important. This is the place. And you can ask why the process was so long. It was few discussions and actually arguments about the words. Gypsy, Sinti, or Roma, which we should choose. And the second, also connected with the words, I mean, Holocaust or genocide. So that's why, as I said, the process creating of this, actually opening this monument was so long. Very important part in commemorating of Roma and Sinti Holocaust have a young Roma and Sinti. Actually, it's important for also for us, and but I think that for everybody that Roma and Sinti young people know more and more and more about their own history. And International Roma Youth Network was established in 2010 by the Roma youth non-governmental organization from different countries, from Albania, Bulgaria, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Macedonia, Slovakia, and Spain. Every year they participate in official ceremony 2nd of August in Oświęcim, and they are part of different educational activities, because initiators of educational activities were of course Roma organizations, but now different institutions from many cities from Poland, from many countries as well, are very engaged to do something, to organize some educational activities around 2nd of August or these days. Even in even history museum of the history of Polish Jews in Warsaw, in Warsaw is very, very active every year. But I would like to stop because when I'm talking about the Jewish organization museum, I would like to add that I don't know, part about the Roma and Sinti Holocaust is also included into very important exhibition in Jewish museum, like for example Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. You can find some part dedicated Roma people and the Sinti Holocaust, and also at the museum in Washington D.C., Museum of Holocaust in Washington D.C. There is a part dedicated of Roma and Sinti Holocaust, but unfortunately there is mistake. There is mistake. Instead the date 2nd of August, the date of the liquidation of the Zigeunerlager, is 31st July. Yeah, and I spoke with the people from museum a few years ago, because when I saw this mistake, it was 2006, so many years ago, and I spoke with the people. How is possible? You have a really great and important council of historians and people who work at the museum. We have also Roma members, who is part of this council. But it's a mistake. I couldn't believe, because it's a very important museum. And I came back a few years later, and I had a meeting with the people from State Department, and they told me that they are working to extend Roma part on the exhibition in museum, and I asked about the mistake, and they say, it still exists, unfortunately, but we are working to to change the date. And I ask, where's the problem? It's only one panel. It's really too expensive for the museum. What's going on? And I was there 2 or 3 months ago, and unfortunately, the mistakes still exist. Now we have a second person. From Roma community who is a member of Memorial Holocaust Council. It's Ethel Brooks, Professor Ethel Brooks from the Rutgers University. So I hope that we will have a progress with this. And very important is also that during the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day, which was January 27, we have a voice as well. When I saying we, I mean Roma and Sinti. It was second or third time when Sinti survivors had an official speech during the ceremony. It's also very important. Okay. When I'm talking about the commemoration and actually about the process, which had started 20 years ago, we can say that the progress is huge. But we must remember that it's not finished. It's so much thing to do still. And despite so many efforts undertaken by Roma and non-Roma organizations, different institutions from Poland, actually from every European countries, the significance of the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti Holocaust, it's still ignored, and so many places where Roma and Sinti were murdered, it's not commemorated. Let me mention about a very bad example from Czech Republic. There was a camp, especially for Roma people. About 1,500 people were there during the 1942 or 1943. For many of them, it was a last stop. About 500 Roma were deported to the Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they were murdered. And today, there is a pig farm. You can remember the name of the city. It's actually not city. Sorry, it's a village, Lety, and this is the name of the camp as well. And this.
Sorry, how do you spell that?
Lety.
Yeah.
Lety. L. How can I?
Put it up so everyone can write
But
it.
do you have something?
Oh, there's no. There should be.
Czech Republic, yeah. And the pig farm is huge. I was there. It was a very sad experience for me, and it's still a sad experience for people whose family died in this camp. Because among the pig you can find a small plaque, a really small monument, with the information that this place, that there was a camp for Roma and Sinti during the war. And actually, many Roma and Sinti organizations, many institutions were engaged with this to liquidate this pig farm, to change the place. But it's impossible. It's impossible for government. It's actually it's impossible for European institutions as well at this moment, because European Parliament published a resolution to call Czech Republic government to liquidate the pig farm. But in the same time, European Commission gave a huge grant to renovate this pig farm. So actually now, we don't have any chance, any opportunities to change the place for the pig farm. And I would like to add about other place in Czech Republic, but it's a bad and good example, because the name Hodonín. It's a name of the village, and it's a name of the camp. And after the war, children could spend their nice holidays in this place. Summer holidays, I mean. And a few years ago, there is a place of memory. Actually, the place of memory was created a few years ago. So you can see that we can observe great process, as I said before, but we have so much to do still, and not only with the commemorating Holocaust of Roma and Sinti, but to educate the Europeans and people generally about Roma and Sinti history and about Roma and Sinti present life, because now we have a really huge problem with the relation between Roma and non-Roma people in Europe. And the Roma minority, it's, as I said before, we have a deal with a very negative image. And actually people don't know each other, and they don't have, actually they want to have any contact to each other, and this is the huge problem. Hate speech, hate crimes, ghettos, I mean separated place for Roma people. It's a daily life for Roma and Sinti in Europe, especially after 2007, when Romania and Bulgaria started to be part of European Union, and about 2 million people started migrate to west of Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.